Hey everybody, Kelly here, PNR again, and today we're having fun with lasers. Got a little hot rod project we're working on. It came to us with some real issues in the suspension world in the back. A really neat little car, done really very well. Wiring's nice and tidy on it. We've done a couple other little trinkety things. I think I mentioned before. Did some gauges, had a fuel gauge issue, didn't work. We ended up putting some Dakota digital gauges inside, replumbed the fuel system, just some real small basic stuff. But when we were in the back and we took out the fuel tank because the sending unit wasn't working, we got the opportunity to inspect the rear suspension, and yeah, wasn't so great. I'm gonna switch you around here and I'll take you over. We'll look at the parts that we took out, and I'll kind of explain to you what was going on. We're kind of already into this a little ways, so I apologize. But all right, so this is what was underneath the car. Leaf springs, obviously. That's not a problem. But the rear end is out of something else. We don't really know what. But this, I don't know what you're thinking. That looks like a chunk of square tube. Well, it is. Those welds right there that have been cut, that one and that one, believe it or not, was welded to the bottom of the axle tube. And then this was sitting on the spring. You see right there, you can see where something had been rubbing on that. And that is the center pin of the spring, which, as you may notice, is nowhere near the center of the axle. So the center pin is offset on this spring here. You can see pins right there, and the center of the axle sat, ish right there. You can kind of see where the U-bolt was, which, I mean, old car technology, that's how it is. These are, I assume, the original springs. But this thing was sitting on top of the spring like that, but it wasn't. It was sitting like that. I don't know if you can see that, but it wasn't. There's a hole for the center pin, but it was sitting like that, and it was barely welded on. And in this bolt hole, there was a piece of square tube, and it went up to the front spring mount. I don't know. And these spring plates, I don't know what they came off of, but they were on the bottom of that part. No big deal. But there again, this one, it's got this notch in it. You can see where it's shiny there and it's shiny there. That was against the bottom of the axle tube, and it's most definitely not. Those are supposed to work. So, yeah. I don't know. It was, or not the axle tube, I'm sorry. This was where the leaf spring ran across here. Leaf spring is supposed to go this way, or if it's upside down, it can run across there because the bend of the plate is away from the spring. Not how it was. And the other one, you can see where the leaf spring was there too. Excuse me, the block would have been sitting there. They cut the edge off. Oops. They cut the edge off, so it's flat-ish. Anyways, I mean, I've seen a lot worse, don't get me wrong, but we're going to make it better. So we got it on the rack over here. Now, we already took the axle out of it and ground it down as best we can. The customer thinks this axle is out of a Pontiac or something. I'm not really sure, but you can see some laser lines there. So what we did was, with the car on the ground at ride height, we put some tape on the car. Then we lined up the crosshairs of the laser right on the center of the center cap. Okay. And then we came up here and we made a mark there and one up higher where the line of the laser went straight up. And then on the front of the fender, there's another mark you can see. In the back fender, there's a mark there. And again, that line would have gone all the way across, intersecting it. So if we take the laser again and we line up on all those marks, we know exactly where the center of that axle should be, or where it was. So that's where we are right now. Axle centered up based on those marks. And then what we did is, you can see the laser lines kind of shining on the bottom of the axle. I wanted to make sure that the axle was straight in the car. It's called thrust angle if you're in the alignment world. And basically what we want to know is this axle pointing straight down the center line of the car, or maybe it's off a little bit and it's, you know, shooting over there or shooting over there. And a tiny bit, honestly, in a street car, it doesn't make that much difference, but you know, we want to make it right. So right now we've got the laser set up on the floor. We've lined up with the center of the front cross member, and the line comes all the way to the back here. You can kind of see down there, it's lined up with the center of the drive, or where the drive shaft goes into the transmission and tail housing. And if we come around over here, you can see that line lines up with the center of the yoke. Okay, so we know the center line, all the way to the front of the car. That's all lined up. Now, we need to make sure that the axle is square according to that center line. Now, remember how I told you we lined everything up with the marks on the outside, so the axle is sitting exactly where it was at ride height when it was installed before. And what we've done is I've just temporarily welded this little piece of 1-inch tubing on both sides, and that's just holding the axle up where it needs to be. Now, if we get back over here again, you can see that laser line going down across the tube, and at first glance looks pretty close. You might be able to tell there, but the line on this side, the near side, is pretty much centered. But if you look over on this side, we're not, and it's probably going to be kind of hard to see on video, but I'm directly underneath it right now, and you can see that this line is off to the right just a little bit. And it's only about 1/4 of an inch. But what that means is, this is the driver's side right here, means that that side is back, or excuse me, farther forward 1/4 of an inch from that side, which means if we took and we lined that laser level up on the axle, and we've already done this, we centered it there, then this line, you start looking up here at the front of the car, and all of a sudden that line disappears. It disappears because I'm in the way. That line is no longer lined up with the transmission. It would be off to the side, and by the time we got to the front of the car where the line goes to the front cross member, the laser line, it's off about, it was probably about 1 inch, 1.25 inches. Again, on a street car, quite honestly, it's not going to really probably make a big difference. What it is going to do is it's going to make the car drive sideways down the road. You know, some people call it dog-legging or whatever, and that means the rear axle is not square in the car, so the back of the car is going to drive one side to the other. I know we're splitting hairs here, but, you know, we're going to build a 4-link under this thing, and we might as well make it right. So what I did is I came around to this side of the car, and we've done all the same measurements. Line there, line there, line there. Man, you won't be able to tell in the video, I'm sure, but the center point of that axle, the center point of that line right there, they're lined up as it was from previous installation, but we get to measuring and the tire is actually not centered in the fender, which goes back to our measurements, or back here where the laser line doesn't come to the center of the axle. So the good news is everything all points to the same thing. Axle just needs to be moved 1/4 of an inch on one side. It's going to center the tire up in the fender better. It's going to make the axle square and true pointing down the road, and everything will be right with the world. Sometimes you'll run into this on older cars where the tire's centered in the fender, but it's not square under the car. And to square it under the car, it screws it up in the fender so bad that you have tire rubbing on the fender or whatever. This car luckily has really small tires on the back, so fender rub's not an issue. But coincidentally, which is a good sign, this means probably the frame's in good shape on this car. When we center that axle geometrically to the car, it's also going to be centered in the fender. So pretty cool. Good check. I mean, we've got extra time in this, just triple checking everything. But again, you know, if we're gonna do it, it's worth doing right. So there you go. What we're gonna do here, as you can see, I've got it at right height, so I wanted to know, excuse the bottle, it's catching brake fluid, we can't get to stop. We needed to know how much room we had in there, which is not exceptional, but got a little bit of room left. We've got probably 3 or 4 inches room for up travel. Car sits fairly low, so we don't want a ton anyhow. We left the front spring mounts because they're in good shape. They're well attached to the frame. We did remove the rear ones. This had the buggy leaf style loop spring mount there, and one of them was broken anyhow, so we don't need that where we're going anyways. We'll clean that up and paint it. We're going to do 4-link. I'm not completely sure what we'll end up with exactly. It kind of depends on what we have for space, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to may or may not reuse this bracket, but this is a good locating point. We know this is, first of all, the exhaust right there. We're not going any far forward. But we know this is a known location that's consistent side to side. So this is going to be our forward mount for the lower link for sure. We're going to come back here with a link and a bracket off of the bottom of the axle here. So that's relatively parallel to the ground. We've already got our pinion angle set where it's going to be in the car when everything's done, so we know that's right. And then we'll work on upper links. This is going to get a couple of coilovers, so yeah, I got to find room for that. This car is pretty tight behind the axle, so probably I'm going to mount the coilovers in front of the axle, which is really not traditional, but coilovers don't care where they are, if it's in front or behind. So we'll have to make some kind of a bracket that comes down, out towards the drum, but it comes down with an eye, so coilover can attach that, and then it'll come up here. We'll build a cross member or something up there to catch the top end. But I just wanted to show you how we use the laser level. Well, it's not a level, it's a laser. Gives you nice straight lines, good reference points, and hopefully we'll end up with a suspension that travels a little better. One of the big complaints the customer had was this thing rode terrible in the back, which I'm sure it did with those bars connecting and everything. Oh, let me show you those bars. I just saw them sitting over here. So over here in the pile of shame, you had these KYB shocks on there, which that wouldn't be a problem, except that they were so bound up they couldn't hardly move. And then, like I said, it had these bars, so that hole had a bolt through it, and it was stuck in that tube that was welded to the bottom of the axle. And then this end had this thing bolted to it, like so. And then this bolt was hooked to the spring bolt. I think they were trying to control axle wrap. But what they did do is they bound up the suspension something terrible. So if you don't know, things like this, like I said, bound up the suspension, but that was a pivot point right there. Okay, so this was a pivot point where the tube went inside the other tube, and it's not going to move much, but it is going to, this bar is going to move like that as the axle travels up and down in the suspension throw. You can't take a piece of tube like this, square tube, drill a hole through it, run a bolt through it, and use that as a pivot. Well, you can, but there's no mirroring surfaces there to wear, or not wear, I should say. You can't grease it, obviously. That should have a sleeve in it or something so that it has something to ride against. Kind of like the shock here. This doesn't pivot, but you've got all this area for the bolt to go through, and even that would be better. At least it'd have something to ride on, and maybe you could put a grease zerk in there or something like that. But here you've got two edges. It's just the edge of the tube, and eventually what that's going to do is probably cut through the bolt, or at very least it's going to oval these holes out really quick, and then whatever this thing was supposed to be doing, it's not going to do anymore, because it's going to be flopping up and down because those holes are worn out. So I'm guessing this was something the customer that owns this said the previous owner, he kind of got in a hurry at the very end of building the car, and maybe this was a stopgap to fix another problem. I'm not sure, but like I said before, I'm not trying to rag on the car because, really it's really a cool little car. Got really nice paint. It's got a small block in it, I don't know, 350 I think, turbo 350 deal. It's got some kind of different front suspension grafted onto it. It's a whole subframe. He again customer believes it came off of a Pontiac of some sort. It's got little wheels on it, which I kind of like on this car, quite honestly. It fits, it works. And you don't have a bunch of tires stuffed into the fender, which is definitely a good deal. So anyhow, we're going to do some more on it. We'll make some more videos building the rear suspension, but that's where we are today. Fun with lasers.